Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the conclusion of our Spring Focus Week on sexuality. We've explored a lot together this week. Redemption from sexual sin and how the Trinity informs our relationships. We've discussed dating, singleness, marriage, and the list goes on. We'll end the week with a conversation entitled, "This is Your Brain in Love," led by our very own Dr. Jeff Schloss. Dr. Schloss was born and raised in California on the coast, where as a youth he dropped in and out of the waves and college 3 times. After a life-changing contact with Christ, he returned to school and graduated from Wheaton College, then went on to the University of Michigan and Washington University for a PhD in biology. Jeff writes and speaks widely in scholarly and in church settings on the fascinating issues involving science and the Christian faith. But his greatest joy is working with students and colleagues here at Westmont, where he is the T.B. Walker Chair of Natural and Behavioral Sciences and the director of our Center for Faith, Ethics, and the Life Sciences. He has been married to his wife, Melody, for 38 years, and they have 3 adult sons. Jeff loves to tromp around tropical and alpine forests with students, to surf with his boys, and to play pranks on Dr. Julio and other unsuspecting souls in the bio department. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeff Schloss.
What a double privilege it is to be with you this morning. First of all, to just be together as a community and to talk about things that matter to all of us. But I have to say, a little more personally, as we were singing, the privilege of being here struck me in a deeper way, because when I was your age, actually, I wasn't in college. I was a dropout, bumming around various beaches in Hawaii, and I don't think I ever imagined that Christ would give me the life that he's given here, with a wonderful wife, with a family, with a community I love, and I'm tremendously grateful for that. So today we want to look at how you're built biologically for sex, for love, for intimacy. And I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you are thinking, no, another lecture on human anatomy. And I actually had a version of this slide with a wardrobe malfunction, but my wife told me not to use it in chapel. But we're going to go deeper than that. And we could also do something like talking about courtship displays in many vertebrate males. The males are real buff to attract females. Humans are a little bit more complicated than that. But some humans still do the male courtship display. Now, I want to say there's a unique thing about what's called a pair bonding or monogamous species. In pair bonding species, this is a true biological fact, the differences between males and females are often less, and the courtship displays are not often as extreme, and yet males with less impressive courtship displays still manage to attract a mate. So, and by the way, Dr. Beebe and Ben, I do want to thank my colleague Steve Giulio for making these slides. Okay, it's so good to laugh, isn't it? But I want you to hang on to that feeling of laughter, because there's actually something biologically about it that's going to relate to what we're going to discuss later on. I do want to go deeper than just anatomy and courtship displays. And what I want to do with you, to pick up on what Maurice was talking about last Wednesday, is ask how we're built for intimacy, how we're built for relationship. It is a divine gift. but it's a divine gift that he is instantiated into the very fabric of our beings, including at the organic or biological level. And the scriptures say, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And we are. And we're fearfully and wonderfully made for love. But it's a little more complicated than this, because the scriptures also say, he knows how we are made. He's mindful that we are but dust. Meaning, the most exalted, most cherished aspects that we all dream about in terms of love and every other aspect of life, our bodies are made to pursue and flourish with, but somehow our bodies are frail, and they don't always take us the wrong direction. One of my favorite thinkers, and Dr. Beeves as well, is Blaise Pascal. And Pascal said this, and by the way, this is going to be a refrain throughout our chapel. He says, man is neither angel nor brute. And the unfortunate thing is, now here's where you'd expect somebody to say, sometimes we just give up and act like brutes. He doesn't. He says the opposite. The unfortunate thing is, he who would act the angel acts the brute. What he means by that is, if you want to set high goals for yourself, you're not going to attain them unless you understand what it is about you that is a detour sometimes. If you want to be an angel to the person you love and find an angel to love and have a heavenly love, you need to understand how we're built this side of heaven to get there, but also what the impediments are. So that's what we want to look at. And in particular, I want to look with you at three different, a lot of this research is actually just really new, three different regions and also processes in the brain: sexual desire, romantic attraction, and monogamous attachment. So here we go. All three of these have completely, not completely, largely non-intersecting processes that make us feel different, that drive us to in different ways. So how about sexual desire? I mean, what is it? And you're thinking, that's kind of a clueless question to ask a group of college students. But what sexual desire is, actually, it's a drive to a particular behavior. Like thirst is a drive to drink. Sexual desire is a drive to a particular kind of touching. And it so happens, by the way, we can measure the strength of drives. I know that doesn't feel true, but in a list of drives, sexual drive is actually lower than a lot of other drives that human beings have. But what causes it? At first order of things, what causes it is hormones, in particular testosterone. By the way, both males and females have testosterone. Sexual drive very often scales to the amount of testosterone that you can make. It also seems to derive from another hormone, estrogen. But because we found recently that testosterone directly influences drive, a lot of people are taking testosterone supplements, either in the form of cream or a patch, if they feel their sexual drive is declining. But what causes testosterone? Well, it happens automatically to some extent when you're around 13 or something, but there are various sights and smells that also stimulate testosterone, estrogen, and other mediators of sexual desire. So here's some fun experiments that were done with college students. Everything's done with college students. They got a group of college students to wear T-shirts for 2 days. Then they put them in bags, and they had men smell the T-shirts. Didn't tell them whose they were. The men could tell and ask them what they preferred. They preferred women's to men's. They preferred women who were in the ovulatory phase of their monthly cycle as compared to the non-ovulatory phase. They preferred the T-shirts of women who, when they did computerized facial analysis, had more symmetrical faces. And they preferred women whose genetic makeup was least similar to their own. Now, they wouldn't have said these things. They wouldn't have gone, ovulating woman. But they preferred them. And here's the wild thing. When smelling T-shirts worn by ovulating women, their testosterone went up. So it wasn't just a matter of conscious preference. Their body was responding in ways they didn't even know their body was responding. By the way, women did the same thing. They preferred T-shirts worn by men with more symmetrical faces. with with the least genetic similarity to their own. Now, interestingly, women preferred different kinds of men at different stages of their cycle. So when they were ovulating, they preferred T-shirts worn by men with more testosterone, and when they weren't ovulating, they preferred T-shirts worn by men with less testosterone. Also, fun experiment, a bunch of college students went to a bar, and they various bars or places where young people hang out, and they went up to about 450 or 500 women. They got good-looking men to go up to them and ask the women, who they did not know, for their phone numbers. And it turns out, of course, a lot of women said no, but it turns out that there was a highly non-random distribution of women who said yes. If women were ovulating, they were more likely to give the phone number out to a man that they'd never met. Now, how on earth did they find out they were ovulating? Because then a guy in a white coat comes up and says after, sorry, you're on, you just been punked. This is a research study. Do you keep your monthly cycle? I actually have an idea. If any of you Westmont business majors would like to talk with me about this to make a lot of money, I think if we could sell an ovulometer to single guys, so here's the bottom line. All these things are going on inside our bodies. I don't want you to think I'm making light of them. C.S. Lewis in The Four Loves says, actually, our bodies are making light of us. It's a divine joke played on us for our endless benefit, to drive us to seek Him, because our bodies are bigger and more wayward than we understand. The olfactory lobe in the brain, by the way, and the olfactory nerves go to a region of the brain that's right adjacent to the region for sexual arousal and emotional stimulation. And oftentimes you don't even know that you're smelling things. And so this brings up our friend Pascal again. He who would act the angel acts the brute. Now, lastly, what stimulates sexual desire? And actually, the most profound stimulator is relationship. This is a little counterintuitive, but in relationship, desire becomes more profound and more abiding, less fleeting. In fact, now here I'm not making a joke. There are a bunch of supplements to stimulate sexual desire. Testosterone supplements, for example. Some of these that I had to jettison. They're really funny, but they're not suitable for chapel. But I have a friend who teaches in Stanford's medical school in the Department of Neurology, and he mentioned to me the other day that Viagra and other sexual enhancement drugs are the single most prescribed class of discretionary drugs in America right now, and they're the least represcribed, meaning people are trying to fix neurochemically what probably is a relationship problem. Now, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder on the issue of sexuality. This may be counterintuitive, but I think it's deeply true and deeply important. Sex, actually, is not a need. It doesn't hurt you not to have it. Sex, remember we said, was a drive. Now, a drive is something that gets us to do a particular behavior that meets a need. So thirst is a drive to get us to do a particular behavior, drink, which meets a need, which is water. And the desire for sex is a drive which gets us to do a particular behavior, which is touch, which meets a need. And what's the need? The need is intimacy. As Maurice told us Wednesday, the need is relationship. Now, in this particular case, you can meet the need without that particular behavior, and that happens all the time. Thank God that we have intimate relationships that are life-supporting and life-enriching that don't require sex. That's wonderful news. And the single person can meet that need never having had sex. The not so wonderful news is if you don't need the behavior to meet the need, it's also true that you can exhibit the behavior and you don't meet the need. You can have sex that doesn't meet the need, and then something strange happens. I said that sex wasn't a need, but if you use it to meet a need that it doesn't meet, it becomes a need. And we call it then an addiction. So when sex becomes a need, we're in a bit of trouble. And here's how it works. You end up finding a reward substitute, sex, when the true need isn't being met. And what happens, this is a generic and I admit simplified version of the pattern of addiction, but it's reasonably accurate. Typically, then you do what's called downregulation, where you actually don't do the behaviors or secrete the neurochemicals that cause reward when the real need is being met. And if you downregulate, then you're dependent on the substitute behavior. At that point, you're addicted. And many times, once you're addicted, once you're dependent, tolerance sets in, so that the same level of activity no longer even works as a substitute anymore, and then you have to increase the substitute. The British playwright Oscar Wilde, writing from prison, said that what the paradox was for me in the intellectual realm, perversion became for me in the moral realm, reflecting on the dynamics of addiction in his own life, always needing something more, always needing something weirder. And there's a tremendous amount of both scholarly research and public attention given these days to sexual addiction. In a group this large, I know that some of you wrestle with this in various forms. But I also want to say that this dynamic isn't just about wayward sexual addiction. It can also occur in the context of a relationship. If I were to phrase it in one phrase is, it's hard to go backwards. Once you've reached a certain level, it's hard to go backwards. A dependence sets in. The scriptures talk about this. Proverbs says, "For why should you, my child, be exhilarated with an adulterer and embrace the body of a foreigner?" This is a scary line right here. "His own iniquities will capture the wicked, and he will be held with the cords of his own sin." Now, this sounds harsh, but I actually don't think God is trying to be harsh here. It's a warning to say that we can get in a situation where even when we want out, we're caught. We're caught in the cords, we're entwined. And it's here, ironically, that I think there's even some hope. The scripture that I began with, where God talks about he knows our frame, that he knows that we're but dust, well, that begins with a promise of forgiveness and mercy. The Lord has mercy on those who respect him, and as a father has mercy on his children. He knows how we're made. He remembers that we're but dust. If we're caught, God isn't surprised. We're dust. These cycles can catch us. And the thing is, we need to cry out for help. So 1 John says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins. And this, for me, is one of the most wonderful verses in all the New Testament because it doesn't stop there. It says he cleanses us from all unrighteousness. Now, I don't want anybody to think I'm being glib or cliche by throwing out a few Bible verses and suggest that they're alone the antidote for addictive patterns of behavior. And actually, I'm not being glib because I know this struggle myself, having grown up in a generation, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, where vulgar behaviors were elevated to virtues, or you weren't cool if you weren't doing them. I know what it was to be caught, and not just to be caught, but actually to have a sense of deep defilement and pollution. Even as a non-Christian, I want it out, and I want to say that I've experienced the marvelous, not just forgiveness, but cleansing of God and the restoration of innocence, which is the promise of the gospel. And if you're there, I really encourage you to find a friend and say, I'm caught, and begin the path of forgiveness and cleansing. But we're talking about more than sex. So what about the second pathway, romantic attraction? I mean, what is it? Well, C.S. Lewis, in his wonderful book, The Four Loves, distinguishes between what he calls Venus and Eros, and actually he's reaching back to Greek thought. Greeks had two different notions of love, sexual love and romantic love. And by the way, this corresponds to exactly what we're finding in biology now in terms of different mediating pathways in the brain. And you might say that sex is a drive to a particular behavior, and being in love is a longing for a person. And by the way, that longing can be consuming. I mean, we can lose our appetite. It can be hard to sleep. We can get butterflies in our stomach. There can be feelings of joy. There can also be feelings of obsession. In fact, so compelling that sometimes it just feels sacred. It's so life-consuming, we feel like this is what we were made for. So you students are laughing. My colleagues don't have any clue who this is. I have to confess, a few months ago, I had never heard of the term Twilight, but I got clued in. Last fall, I was in a research institute at Princeton University, and we had our own little institute building. And this is a joke that cost me a little money. I bought the complete Twilight series for $53, and I put it in the research library with a note saying, "Gift of Dr. Linfesti," my colleague living across the hall. So it hasn't been discovered yet, but I'm waiting for payback when it does. Anyways, you don't know how long I have waited for you. I'd rather die than stay away from you. There's something about being in love where you'd give up anything just to be with the person. C.S. Lewis says for that reason, romance speaks to us with the call of the divine, and it's easy to idolize. We'll get to that in a minute. But what causes it? I mean, first of all, how is it caused? We've been doing a lot of neurophysiological studies on romantic in-love people of late, and find that brain responses actually scale to degree of felt passion of in-loveness, but we're also looking at the actual neurochemicals that mediate this. Dopamine, which is a reward substance in the brain, is very high. Serotonin is very low, which is also, by the way, associated with obsession or obsessive-compulsive disorder. And there's some indication that the chemical phenylethylamine spikes. This is a stimulant, kind of like meth or like diet pills. It gives you a buzz, your heart rate goes up, it's hard to sleep, appetites go down. It's found in high quantities in chocolate, by the way. And maybe that's some reason why people bring chocolate on dates. But who do you fall in love with? This is interesting. Who are people sexually attracted to is actually relatively generalizable. We can talk about the traits that tend to attract one sex to another. This one isn't. So a guy named John Money at Johns Hopkins University Med School has spent his whole career looking on what he calls love maps. And he thinks that every single person has an individual one. It's not predictable. And here's the kind of scary thing. It's not only not predictable, but you probably don't know what yours is. You think you know the qualities in somebody that you would like to spend your life with, but that may or may not correspond to the qualities that actually give you the feelings of falling in love. In fact, it's a little bit like laughter. We can decide whether or not to laugh. If I think a joke is inappropriate, I won't laugh, but there are a lot of inappropriate jokes that are still fun. I find funny. Sometimes I have to stifle a laugh. You don't get to decide what you find funny. You don't decide, wake up one day and think, oh, I don't think puns are funny, but I'm going to really cultivate the capacity to... And you don't get to decide what qualities in somebody else make you fall in love. But it's a powerful drive. It's a much more powerful drive than sex, actually. People will sacrifice much more in their life for the sake of somebody they're desperately in love with than they will for a sexual attraction. And I think one of the things that folks were hoping to have happen in chapel today was some encouragement to stay sexually pure, or a way for those of us who have taken detours to be cleansed. But I have to say, I'm equally concerned that you not spend your life with somebody as a function of the accident of who you happen to develop feelings for. The Scripture gives us this counsel. Charm can fool you, and beauty can trick you, but a man or woman who honors the Lord is to be praised. That ought to be our first filter, not our last hoop. Once we've fallen in love with someone, oh, okay, they're a Christian, it's okay. Now, a couple of myths about romantic attraction. One is that romantic love spiritualizes sex or makes it right. We said that sex is a drive for intimacy, and so if it leads us to intimacy, does that make it right? And both the Scriptures and C.S. Lewis says, no, that's not what makes it right. It makes it feel right, but that's, in fact, not what makes it right. In fact, that view is highly contrary to a Christian perspective. Famous atheist Friedrich Nietzsche said, the spiritualization of sexuality is called love. It's a great triumph over Christianity. But another myth is that true romance with the right person lasts forever. Boy, I almost felt unfair and didn't know who to choose from public life, but I ran into this quote a while back. I was sure that Brad was the love of my life, and then suddenly one day I did not feel the same. I told myself better to have enjoyed the relationship while it lasted rather than to stretch it out and become unhappy. The truth of the matter is, as we monitor both self-reports of how in love you feel, but as we also monitor the neurochemistry of romance, including phenylethylamine, it declines. In fact, I'm not sure that you would want to live with that degree of compulsiveness and intensity your whole life. You might never get your homework done. This has led John Money, a person I referred to earlier, into a counseling practice of what he calls love junkies or phenylethylamine addicts, people who hop from one person to another because they get addicted to this rush of falling in love. And that raises the question, is that it? I mean, is that kind of the biology we have, sexual attraction and this fleeting ability to become obsessively but wonderfully preoccupied with one another? And for a while, biologists were thinking, yeah, that is it. And in the last few years, we've actually discovered a third biochemical adaptation for intimacy, and it's called the attachment phase. And attachment is just the deep and abiding sense of connection, and oftentimes as opposed to exhilaration, it's a breathe a sigh, like camping next to a mountain stream. This is where I belong and want to stay for the rest of my life. You might say you fall in love, but you grow attached. And I want to describe for you a little bit what causes it. Now, before we get to romantic or marital attachment, think of a more common form of attachment that's easy to observe. Maternal attachment. Yeah. I love this one. Now, you're all going, oh. The reason you're doing that is because there's a part in your brain that empathically recognizes that recognizes and appreciates attachment, and that is able to do it. Now, here's the question. Most higher species attach to their offspring, but they don't attach to their mating partners. Offspring attachment is mediated by a chemical called oxytocin. What mediates in those few species mating attachment? These guys aren't very cute, but two different species of rodents called vole, one attaches for life and the other mates and goes their own way. And we found the difference between these two species is mediated by oxytocin and actually a particular gene that one has and the other doesn't. And this is really cool. If we take that gene and put it in the non-bonding species, it becomes bonding. It becomes attached. Do we have that gene? There's been a big debate about whether humans are built biologically to attach or whether this is just some religious trip put on us with a biology that isn't built to handle it. And the answer is yes. Actually, we are. For life. This is my mom and dad, actually, and married for 67 years. How does it work? I don't want to reduce it to a single gene, but human beings have a genetic constellation that cause oxytocin receptor sites in our brain to respond to spousal intimacy and give deep feelings and abiding feelings of connection. But I do want to point out a couple of myths here. First myth is, attachment stage is deadly dull, I'd rather have romance. And actually, the reverse is true. If you want to focus on deadly, it's actually life-giving to be attached. So a tremendous amount of work on partner support, generating oxytocin, which boosts immune response, which lowers blood pressure, which increases wound healing, decreases various cardiovascular problems, all sorts of morbidity and mortality decline in successfully attached couples. And you might also ask, well, okay, but does it kill romance? And this is a fascinating study that just came out recently that surveyed 25 other studies done all around the world in various cultures that found that what we talked about early, just romance, actually is sustained in attached long-term couples and is more life-rewarding than in unattached couples. And if you don't mind, I want to testify to this personally. So here's my wife, Melody. When I hear her voice, we've been married 38 years, and when I hear her voice coming into the office in the bio building, my heart jumps. Or when I walk into her room, my heart, after 39 years, it just jumps. Now, I think that her heart jumps when she sees me, too. But I'm going to be in the doghouse for showing you this next picture. This is Buffalo Melody. So, okay. So actually, lastly, home stretch here. Another myth is that attachment is the basis for marriage. Boy, would that be great if we could let our neurochemistry run its course, and that would kind of effortlessly keep us married and give us a good marriage. It's Pascal again. We've discovered variation in the genes for oxytocin that correlate with marital problems. Again, I don't want to reduce you to a bag of chemicals, but you are a bag of chemicals. And we've also discovered that things in your upbringing influence the density of oxytocin receptor sites, which can cause attachment disorders. It's not so easy biochemically for everyone to attach. And furthermore, even if it is easy, there are other things in life that disrupt that process. We're back to Pascal. He who would act the angel acts the brute. The good news is we have the capacity. The bad news is the biological capacity is frail, and it alone doesn't get the job done. I would turn that around. Attachment isn't the basis for marriage. Marriage is the basis for attachment. And to close, I want to share a couple of quotes with you. One of them is from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, German theologian who lost his life in a concentration camp. And from the concentration camp, he wrote a wedding sermon to his to his niece. And Bonhoeffer says, it's not your love that sustains the marriage, but from now on, it's the marriage that sustains the love. I'm a biologist, but we're beyond biology right now. You're expecting me to say that what I'm really talking about is marriage commitment sustains love, and I think that's true. But I also want to say, and this is the last major point I want to make, and maybe the most controversial, but I think the most important. Marriage is more than commitment. Marriage is not just two people making vows to one another. Here's Bonhoeffer again. As God today adds his yes to your yes, and as he confirms your will with his will, he creates out of your love something quite new, the holy estate of marriage. Marriage is something that God does. It doesn't just happen automatically when two people make a promise. That's a bold theological assertion. It's a foundation that God lays, marriage. And our relationship is something we built on top of what God's done. You might ask, it's often said there's no such thing as a perfect marriage. I actually think that's not true. If God does marriage, I often tell Mel, our marriage is perfect. It's just our relationship that needs a little work. And that's true. But if we approach all these earlier topics of sexual attraction, a sexual desire, and romantic attraction, and monogamous attachment, as ultimately being rooted in our biology, but built on something that God does uniquely, bringing two people together, making two one, that gives us a tremendous amount of hope, and it sets sex and love and attachment in its proper context. I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. And for this reason will a man leave his father and a mother be united to his wife. The two will become one flesh, and so they are now no longer two but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. Thanks a lot, folks, for your attention, and I'm going to close with a brief benediction. May the words of your mouth and the meditation of your heart be acceptable in the sight of God, our strength, our Redeemer, our Maker. Amen.